Next on the Delaware Way, the crime rate is down in Wilmington. We'll talk to the police chief. And the new basketball team is ready to go, but will the building be ready? This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. Recently, the city of Wilmington has seen a dramatic downturn in the numbers of shootings and the numbers of murders. One of the people who can claim responsibility for that is the chief of the Wilmington Police, Robert Tracy. Thank you so much for coming back. I appreciate it. We talked to you when you first got the job, and you outlined a lot of the things that you wanted to implement. Can I assume they've all been implemented?
Well, I wouldn't say they're all implemented, but I think we've made a lot of progress, and it's really a 4-year plan. And you overlay the strategies. As you get good at one, you build a good base, and then you continue to build off that. So where we need to be, we still have a ways to go, but where we are right now, I see some very promising progress.
Well, the numbers have been wonderful, and that was the one thing that was nagging the Wilmington Police Department for over a decade. Every year this was brought up. Every year the image of the city was hurt. There was a famous article, infamous article in in Newsweek about Murder Town, USA, talking about Wilmington. And so that was, you'd have to agree, your number one task when you came in.
Well, absolutely. The perception of crime is something that can hurt a city immensely, as we can see from that Newsweek article. We went from a city that probably was somewhat of a sleepy town. Sometimes we had a little bit of a crime uptick, but then that Newsweek article really put the city on the map. And there's certain things that we can do about that, when I was asked to take the interview for this job by Mayor Michael Pizicki, I was very fortunate to be chosen as his police chief, but I knew those type of strategies that we've done in New York and done in Chicago I knew would work here, and I outlined them last time we talked, Larry.
It's tough when you say a strategy in Chicago that you knew would work here, because Chicago's having horrible problems.
Well, they certainly are, and I think that validates a lot of things that have worked in New York. My time in Chicago was from 2011 to 2015, and the strategies that we bring forward here into Wilmington, we're able to have, within 2 years, in 2013, 2014, we were able to reduce murders and shootings to 50-year lows in the city of Chicago. Sometimes that gets lost in politics and it gets lost in the press. And we were also able to reduce crime by 40% in the city of Chicago. My boss was fired in December of 2015, and I left 3 weeks after that. So our numbers stand for themselves in the type of policies and practices that we put in place. What happened in Chicago, they abandoned them in 2016, 2017, and 2018 to reactionary policing, and you see the results that they're having now. And it's very disheartening, because I have a lot of people that I'm friends with, I got to know, and it's a really great city, and it deserves better. Right.
I want to talk about Wilmington, not Chicago, but I do want to ask one last question about Chicago, because there has been some talk about sending federal troops in, or troops might be the wrong word, but sending some federal forces in. Is that a good idea?
No, absolutely not. If you do policing right, and you do it with the community, and one thing I talked to you about is that all these strategies have to be done with community engagement and transparency. And I think when it's done right, and it's been done right in other places, there's going to be no need for federal troops or state troops or National Guard to come in to the city. I think it'd be handled when a police department has the right leadership, it's run the right way, politics is taken out of policing, and the officers are allowed to do their job both constitutionally and fairly, and working with the community. We can have very good results without having any of these additional resources come in. And
that's a good transition into Wilmington. The numbers that I read were shootings down over 60%, murders down over 60%. Is that still the case?
Well, the shooting victims are down 60%. Unfortunately, for shooting murders, it's been a little less than 50%. It usually correlates, but we're not having that year. But over a length of time, we continue with the amount of shooting victims. We're in a city where almost 80%, almost close to between 80–90% of murders are by gunshot. If you reduce the shootings, the murders will naturally come down. So it's closer to 50% as far as murder by gunshot. But bringing down the shootings the way we have in the last year, over 60%, that translates to over 100 less people that are shot. right now compared to the same time last year, which is an incredible amount of people that are not going to the hospital and families are not suffering.
Right, and if you bring down the shootings, I see the logic in that, and so the murder rate based on the shootings would just be bad luck at that point. I mean, it's unfortunate that some of them were successful.
It's a little bit of a higher average than where it should be as far as where our murders compared to last year, but overall, working on the shootings and reducing the shootings are going to help us with the murder rate, and they have.
So how did you reduce the shootings?
Well, first of all, you have to have a plan in place. The plan in place, you build a base of the same officers in the same area every time they work. And then if there is a shooting, we overlay things with intelligence-led policing. And it's not just about deployment, it's about the people that are committing the crime. I've talked about this before, and you look at this city, New York, Chicago, and other cities out there. I haven't done the statistics on them, but when you do an audit of the ones committing the violence, and the ones that have the highest propensity for violence, it usually comes down to less than 0.5% of the population in each city that is committing 60 to 70% of the violent crime. So it's not just about deployment in these areas, it's also about the people that are committing the most violence. And if you concentrate on them, first you can look to help them in reentry, you look to give them options, but you don't give them a choice to carry guns. And then you actually, if they want to cause carnage in the community, concentrate on these individuals, and the rest will start coming down. They also have associates. When there is a shooting, you try to prevent the first shooting from happening. But if one does happen, you have to take a look at all the associates of the victim, because they're the ones that are going to retaliate. So you have to make sure immediately in a plan when a shooting happens that we have a plan in place that's put together within the first 20 minutes of what the intelligence information identified in the victim and who's in conflict with each other, and make sure we deploy with an intelligence-led strategy after every shooting that continues on days after that.
So many things to talk to you about. I want to talk about the police officers carrying Narcan now. I also want to talk about aggressive panhandling when we return and continue our conversation with the Chief of Wilmington Police, Robert Tracy.